podcast is right for you. Talking MMA and UFC. No casuals is the place to be. Whether it's Aiden, Luke, or Teddy too. The No Casuals podcast is right for you.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of No Casuals, our 10th episode. We're doing it a little bit different today. What we're going to do is we're not going to talk about a single fight from next week. We will not be talking about 313 because we want to do a special episode for that because that card is so good. So, we're just going to talk about 314 and 315, and we're going to do a special episode for 313 coming in the next couple of weeks. We're going to talk about 314, 315, some of the upcoming fight nights because we had so many fight nights in the last few weeks. We're going to pretend the last 2 weeks didn't even happen. We're going to keep it right going, but first we do want to talk about the main events from the last couple of weeks. First, let's talk about Jared Cannonier defeating Gregory Rodriguez via TKO. What did you make of his performance and what seems to be a career comeback for Cannonier, Luke?
Yeah, it's great to be back on another episode. Let's dive right in. So I was one of those people who was really hyping up Rodriguez. I thought that he had the power and I guess the cardio, but I was completely wrong to defeat Cannonier. He completely I think he looked great in that first round. He hit Cannonier with some pretty great shots. Like, he has the power. I know he does, especially at middleweight, but he gassed out. I mean, that was plain and simple. He lost everything he had by the second round, and it was just, that was it.
Yeah, Luke, I completely agree. I think Cannonier showed himself in a new light. He showed that he can hang with the best of them. He showed what he looked like against Marvin Vettori in that dominant performance we saw a couple years ago. I'm really excited for that. Jared Cannonier is one of my favorite fighters. If you couldn't tell from the last episode, I'm over the moon that he won. And I'm excited to see who he fights next. I think, for my money, he might do better moving back up to light heavyweight as opposed to staying at middleweight because middleweight's a bit of a logjam right now at the top. There's no one really left for him to fight. So if he moves up to light heavyweight, I could see a plethora of fresh matchups, a majority of which I think are winnable. That's my take. Next, we do want to talk about last Saturday's card, headlined by Manel Kape versus Asu Almabayev. I missed it because I was watching Tank Davis box in the Barclays Center. However, Luke watched it at home. Luke, fill me in on what happened and fill me in on the stories to know from this week.
All right, so I'll talk about a couple things. I mean, I'll start with the main event just because it was so notable. Manel Kape, he ended Almabayev's 17-fight win streak with pretty much with ease. He absolutely dominated on the striking. He had Almabayev at one point running around the octagon in a circle to avoid his punches. And it was just the definition of dominance, especially like just a striking elite performance. Now, when John Anik was interviewing him, they talked about a title shot, maybe immediately. And I don't know how I feel about that. I feel like it probably makes more sense to give him a number one contender fight against Brandon Royval. Maybe after Kai Kara France deals with that title shot, we'll see what I mean, we'll see what the UFC ends up doing. But it was certainly impressive. I would understand whatever they do with him. And I know it was contrary to maybe your prediction. And do you want me to talk about, the co-main? I mean, I have a lot to say about other fights on that card too.
I mean, yeah, fill me in. I mean, what are the stories to know? And even though I did think Almabayev was going to make it look easy against Kape did impress me. I did watch the main event. However, I do want to draw attention to my pick for prospects of the night. Going into this, by the way, in our notes, we do a prospect of the night category. We're trying to build that into the show. My pick, Haider Emil, was able to pull out a win against William Gomes. Can you tell me about that fight, Luke?
Yeah, that was also another incredible fight. This card was chock full of them. Gomes, he was looking good in the first, and I actually had him winning the first. He has some very technical striking. He was throwing great punches, but what I was most impressed with was Haider Emil's chin. He was eating these like they were nothing, and Gomes actually ended up just gassing out. Emil's cardio was phenomenal, and he was tanking any strikes that Gomes was landing. His chin and cardio won him the fight, and it was just another great performance. Great pick by you.
And then I do want to draw attention to two more fights on that card. I've heard a lot of noise online about the Esteban Ribic fight and his fight against Nasrat Haqparast, which ended in a split decision. Did you have that fight going in the direction of Haqparast? How did you score that fight? Was it as true of a robbery as some of the internet is saying right now?
I don't know if it was as true as a robbery. I had it 29-28 Ribovic. And he ended up winning. I mean, Haqparast ended up winning by split decision. So I don't know if it was as like much of a robbery as the internet is saying. All three judges gave the second round to Haqparast, which is kind of interesting because I know at least on Verdict MMA and sources like that, it was pretty consistently 29-28 Ribovic, where the first two rounds, or the last two rounds went to Ribovic uh, by a lot. I mean, it wasn't something that was close. So Ribovic had 149 significant strikes, which is comparing to Haqparast 135, so it was close. I don't think it was it was a notable robbery, but was it to the extent as the internet's talking about? Probably not.
Sure. And then one last fight. Your pick for prospect of the night wasn't too shabby either. You picked Mario Pinto out of Portugal,
Yeah.
who had a second round knockout over Austin Lane and a really good come from behind victory. Do you think that he is still a prospect you thought he was going to that fight?
Of course I do. Yeah, he's 10-0. I mean, Austin Lane's very talented. He had this guy rocked. I'm pretty sure he knocked him down. It was a very back and forth in that first round. They are heavyweights, so it's bound to happen. He's got to clean up his defense if he wants to continue to be someone who I'm looking at as a prospect. But in the end, he came out on top with a amazing KO. Had his eyes rolled back.
Yeah, and I watched that fight too, over a burger. It was a great burger to watch. But what I'll say is that for Pinto, at least, I'm a little softer on him than I was going to the fight. I thought he was going to be a great prospect. He knocked out Lucas Camacho, who was a great regional fighter in the first round, to get into the UFC on the Contender Series. I was really hot on him. And Austin Lane is a guy who's notoriously chinny, so to see him get knocked out is not shocking, right? However, what I will say is that when you're looking at the bottom of the UFC top 15, you're looking at really three big prospects, in my opinion. You're looking at Waldo Cortez Acosta. You're looking at Shamil Gaziv. You're looking at four, actually. You're looking at Taliesin Teixeira. And you're looking at Mick Parkin, right? All of those fighters combined, in my memory, have, I believe, three combined losses across all four fighters. One is undefeated, and the other three have one loss collectively, if I remember correctly. It's something like that. And these guys are elite mixed martial artists. And Taliesin Teixeira would knock out his opponent in 30 seconds. Waldo Cortez Acosta's climbed the ranks very quietly, using elite boxing, very fast hands at heavyweight. So Pinto, you're right. If he gets caught by any one of these guys, any one of those four, it could be a bad time for him. I mean, Gaziv's coming off a huge knockout with a wrestling base. Parkin has great striking as well. I would be worried for Mario Pinto right now with that striking defense and what I did see from his struggles against a guy of the quality of Austin Lane, which admittedly is a much lower quality at present than the quality of, say, Taliesin Teixeira or Shamil Gaziv. So
Yeah, completely agree with you.
those are my 2 cents on the Pinto problem as far as I currently see it. But let's move on to the future, because this is a future-focused episode of No Casuals. We're gonna go kind of in order. We're gonna jump around because there have been so many fights announced in the last 3 weeks. It is insane. Probably the craziest 3 weeks in terms of bookings, maybe in the history of the sport. We had 2 pay-per-views get fully built. We had a couple fight nights get announced too. So we're gonna start with the fight nights and work our way over to the pay-per-views. First fight night is UFC Kansas City had a couple bouts get added to it, including the main event, Khalil Rountree Jr. versus Jamal Hill, and the co-main event, Anthony Smith versus Zhang Mingyang. 2 light heavyweight clashes. Who do you have in the main event, Jamal Hill and Khalil Rountree Jr.? Who do you got?
I got Khalil Rountree Jr. just based off their performances against Alex Pereira. I think that Khalil had a much more impressive performance where he challenged Alex Pereira to almost I think probably that was the second greatest matchup in terms of how much Pereira struggled. So I think that Roundtree's going to probably get it done. I think that Hill is coming off 2 back-to-back losses, and it's not something that I think he can win.
Look, I'm a big fan of Jamal Hill's. I'm a really big fan of his character, a big fan of his fight style. However, he has some pretty clear weaknesses in his stand-up game. I mean, his boxing, his pure boxing, is a little behind for the division. As gutsy as he is, as great of a warrior as he is, he looks very good at moments against Yuri Prochazka. He's looked very good against Glover Teixeira. Looks very good against Johnny Walker. However, a guy like Khalil Rountree is not going to leave very many openings on the feet. We saw that in the Pereira fight. Pereira had to go through deep waters to mount a comeback and get a win against Khalil Rountree Jr. in the 4th round by effectively shutting his body down to the point where he couldn't fight anymore. So what I'm seeing here is I'm seeing 2 very gutsy warriors. This is going to be an incredible fight. Everyone is so lucky in Kansas City. But despite the fact that this fight is as incredible as it is, I agree with you, and I see it going Khalil Rountree Jr.'s way preemptively because I see Khalil Rountree Jr. as a guy who leaves less openings on the feet and probably has more power in his hands than Jamal Hill. So I think stylistically it's a bad matchup for Jamal Hill. If he was fighting a guy with maybe a little bit less power and maybe a little bit more of a wrestling background, say maybe a Nikita Krylov or a Dominic Reyes almost, who are fighting at 314, that's been announced, so we're not going to talk about that on the show. I could see an advantage for Hill. However, with this specific matchup, I think it is Khalil Rountree's show, effectively. The Co-main event, however, is another light heavyweight clash towards the bottom of the top 15. Anthony Smith, who's ranked 15th right now, and John Young, who's currently unranked and undefeated in the UFC. This is a classic veteran prospect matchup. Smith has mentioned that he will retire, win or lose. Do you think Smith has it in him to get one last win after a pretty great career?
Yeah, I really think he does, and I think that this is a perfect matchmaking for two, older fighters who could be both their retirement fights. I was really happy to hear that this was going to be his last fight just because of what we were hearing from him after his fight at 308, I think it was.
Something like I
Something
think
like
it was
that.
309 against Reyes at the
Yeah,
Reyes.
but I think he'll get it done.
Look, I'm completely disagreeing with you. Actually, we've agreed so far on the show, but I really don't see eye to eye here. Xiaomin Young is undefeated in the UFC, 3-0, all knockouts. Has looked absolutely devastating. Is probably the best unranked light heavyweight prospect outside of maybe Ibo Aslan, who lost in Seattle to Ian Kutalaba. Again, we're not going to talk about that here because that is old news, and we talk about new news on this show. However, Xiaomin Young is a wrecking ball. I mean, he's killer be killed, and Smith is towards the tail end of what has been a great career, and I look forward to seeing him on the mic as an analyst for many years to come. However, I don't know if he still has it in him as a mixed martial artist in order to beat a guy that is on such a kill path as Min Young is right now. Okay, let's talk about another fight night. This announcement flew way under the radar, shockingly to me, because Josh Emmett got booked for a fight against Lerone Murphy, who's undefeated both in the UFC and as a professional, in what is going to be, in my opinion, a really good fight. I mean, for context, Murphy has fought in his last two fights. He got a unanimous decision over Edson Barbosa and over Dan Ige. Josh Emmett came off the thunderous knockout over Bryce Mitchell. This is a great fight. You've got a technical kickboxer against a guy with the most power in the division. I don't see how this fight is boring at all.
Yeah.
Do you have a pick yet? This fight really has me on the fence. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, I'm completely agreeing with you. I'm very much on the fence because in one night, like I see Lerone Murphy as still a prospect. I mean, he's 15-0. And Josh Emmett hasn't fought since UFC 296. Like this guy is inactive. He's very inactive. I don't know what he's doing outside the UFC, but I'm hoping he's been keeping up with his training because it's been over a year. So we know that Josh Emmett has some of the most unbelievable power, but does he have the pace and the technique that Murphy has to land like that one shot or two shots that he needs to really rock Murphy? I don't know. I'm leaning towards Lerone Murphy probably winning.
You know, Luke, I don't always agree with you on the show, but I agree with you right now because I think that we've seen Lerone get hurt. I mean, he got hurt badly in the earlier stage against Edson Barbosa. He rallied, found a decision, found a great fight in that. And it's a very crafty veteran who has knockout power. Maybe not as much as Josh Emmett, but probably more technical ability than Josh Emmett. And he was able to pull out a win there. I envision the same against Josh Emmett here. And I envision a really big fight for Murphy if he's able to get the win against Emmett. Okay, now we get into our pay-per-view craziness. We'll talk about UFC 314, which is in April in Miami. The main event is the undisputed featherweight title. That is an important detail there between Alexander Volkanovski and Diego Lopez, because Ilia Topuria has now vacated the featherweight title in order to move up and fight a number one contender bout at lightweight. Now, we don't know who Ilia is fighting yet or when he is fighting. However, his excuse was that he had weight cutting issues, which caused him to be unable to make featherweight anymore, and that he wanted to move up and fight Islam Makhachev. The UFC, however, according to themselves, has been a little more hesitant to give champion versus champion bouts, and thus decided to let him fight a number one contender against likely someone to the tune of Charles Oliveira, Dustin Poirier, one of the old guards at 155, and see if Ilia can hang in that division. So, with all of that in mind, what do you make of that whole situation, Luke? Because there's a lot to chew on there.
Yeah, there certainly is. Well, I understand Ilya and his coach's decision to do this because recently his coach came out and said that he's walking around at 187 pounds. So outside of the fights, that means he's cutting over 40 pounds just to make that 145 mark, which is unreal. I mean, that is literally unreal. And the amount of torment and stress that's going to put on his body before the fight is insurmountable. So I just don't understand like maybe why this wasn't done earlier. I mean, I'm happy that it's finally done, and I think that it makes sense for the future of his career. Although I wished like maybe he clear out more of the division. I think it's already. I mean, it's been impressive. I would like to see him maybe versus Lopez before moving up, but you know, I think that Volk versus Lopez is going to be an amazing fight. And there's certainly a lot to talk about here.
Yeah, so much, but we'll keep it pushing because we want to save some for future episodes. 314, the whole main card got announced, guys. So we're just gonna go fight by fight. Michael Chandler, number 7 ranked lightweight in the world, and former Bellator champion and former lightweight title challenger, is fighting the rising Paddy the Baddy Pimblett. Whoa, 5-round co-main event. Little bit of a loss of words here because that fight is, again, a lot of variables on that one too, based on stylistic matchups, and also there's gonna be a war of words for that fight. And if you guys don't know Paddy, he loves to talk, so we'll see an exciting fight there. Do you have any thoughts on that fight, or should we just keep rolling on this card because there are so many fights on this card?
Yeah, I mean, they absolutely stacked 314, but I'm glad Patty's gonna be able to verse someone who's a little bit higher of a rank, and I think the UFC did this where maybe he's one of those lightweights that Chandler's one of those lightweights. It's not gonna be easy for him, but maybe it's winnable.
Yeah, I think so too. I think this is a favorable matchup for Chandler to an extent, with Paddy the Baddy being kind of hittable and Michael Chandler having very big power. Michael Chandler having an extensive wrestling career, with Paddy having a great jiu-jitsu career. However, at the same time, you have a very strong chin in Paddy against the susceptible jiu-jitsu defense of Chandler. So that will be a very interesting fight too. Also on 314, Jeff Neal, number 8 ranked welterweight in the world, is fighting Carlos Prates, number 14 ranked welterweight in the world. That's off the top of my head. I don't know if that's right. I'm hoping it is. Um, Prates, of course, is a superstar, really rising up in the fan base, coming off a huge knockout over Neil Magny. Jeff Neal is tried and true, came off a injury win over Rafael dos Anjos. This should be a very high level striking matchup. It is honestly my most anticipated fight on the card in terms of a entertainment value. Who do you got in this one, Luke?
I got Carlos Prates, and this is absolutely. I think this is going to be as close as it gets in terms of fights on this card. You know, we're talking about two of the best strikers in their division, and I'm excited to see Prates fight someone who's a little higher ranked than him, and I think he deserves it. Um, and I think honestly, Jeff Neal is one of those fights that's it's probably going to be it's probably winnable. This is good matchmaking by the UFC. It's going to be close, but if Prates was to face some of those higher ranks, like maybe his hype was get a little bit crushed.
And look, I completely agree. I think that Jeff Neal is a perfect test for Prates at this stage. Prates has kickboxing, he has knockout power. We know how good he is. However, Jeff Neal is tried and true. We know he can knock anybody out in the division. Jeff Neal is his nickname is Hands of Steel, and he didn't get that for no reason. He hits. So we have a interesting dynamic between a fighter that has true knockout power and very creative boxing, someone who took Shavkat Rakhmonov to the deepest waters that he's ever been in outside of the Ian Gary fight, against a guy who seems unstoppable right now. I'm really excited for this fight. This is going to be a great fight. And then 2 more fights for 314. One is the debutante Patricio Pitbull, former Bellator legend, is fighting Yair Rodriguez in his UFC debut in what may be a title eliminator, perhaps, if Evloev doesn't get the title shot, which he may or may not, depending on how this fight goes. How do you feel about this fight?
Well, I'm super excited to see what Pitbull does. I know there's a lot of hype surrounding him. I don't even know that much about him, so I'm hoping you can fill me in a little bit about what he's done at, was it Bellator?
Bellator, yeah.
Yeah,
Bellator.
yeah.
I mean, here's the thing: is Pitbull he's as legendary of a Bellator fighter as there's ever been. I mean, he is Bellator, right? However, he's already older, which is probably why they're giving him such a highly ranked opponent immediately, because they know that they'll probably only get 3 or 4 years out of his career in the UFC. Personally, I would not have signed him if I was UFC, just not due to his lack of talent, because he is UFC roster quality, but because let's say he wins here, let's say he wins this fight, gets a title shot, fights Evloev for a title limit, whatever, right? Let's say he wins 5 fights in the UFC, loses 0. I think that would make him about 36 if he fights twice a year. At featherweight, a 36-year-old champion is quite literally unheard of. It's never happened before. So it kind of puts the UFC in a trap where you have this great champion and you don't know how much you can defend, or you have a Bellator champion who you feed to your UFC guys and uses cannon fodder, which also seems problematic to me. So truthfully, I don't know if I would have made this signing. However, I'm excited to see it because we're seeing another guy who is championship quality in the UFC without having to see him rise up the ranks. He's coming in ready to go, ready for the top 5, and I'm excited to see it.
Yeah.
One more fight for 314. This one was recently announced. Bryce Mitchell is fighting Jean Lord Silva. Now, look, I'm going to give a little bit of a diatribe here because I am not a big fan of Bryce Mitchell's due to litany of remarks he's made towards various marginalized groups that were deeply offensive, which is why I'm really happy to see this matchmaking. John Silva is the scariest, maybe the scariest guy at featherweight across the entire division. I don't know who else I'd put. I'd maybe put Edson Barbosa up there, and I might put Steve Garcia up there. That's about it in terms of who would hurt me the most in a cage. Maybe Josh Emmett too. Those four. But John Silva's in that conversation without a doubt, and he's not even ranked yet, which is ridiculous. Bryce Mitchell, of course, is ranked towards the bottom of the top 15, coming off a win over Crone Gracie. Prior to that, he got knocked out by Josh Emmett, and I anticipate the same in Miami. I anticipate Silva showing Mitchell how good he is with his unorthodox striking and his ability to find violence and getting a finish against Bryce Mitchell. Do you see this fight going any differently, or are you in agreement with me, Luke?
I'm in complete agreement with me. And outside of my opinions on what he said online, just putting those aside, I think it's going to be, I mean, speaking of Josh Emmett, this gives me like flashbacks, and this is going to be shades of Mitchell versus Emmett at 296. I think that Silva's going to knock him out in great fashion. And I think that the UFC, I mean, I know Dana expressed that his dislike with some of Mitchell's comment. It's almost like this is the ultimate like payback for them. Like, okay, we're going to put you up against Silva, who's like the scariest guy, scariest prospect in this division, who's undefeated and who's coming off like one of the most impressive knockouts we've seen on a fight night card as of recent. So it's just like, in so many ways, this fight makes sense, and I'm just so excited for it.
Yeah, no, it's a great fight, but we've spent enough time talking about UFC 314. UFC 313 is this week, so we got to make sure that we're focused on what's coming first. However, before UFC 314, there was a little bit of a mix-up in the welterweight division. Leon Edwards was supposed to fight Jack Della Maddalena. Jack Della Maddalena was pulled from that fight to fight at 315. We'll talk about that in a second. Replacing Jack Della Maddalena is Philadelphia's own Sean Brady. Now, Brady is undefeated in the UFC despite a loss to the champ, Bilal Muhammad. Leon Edwards is coming also off a loss to Bilal, but was a former champion with wins over Kamaru Usman and Colby Covington. This is an interesting stylistic matchup with a striker as technical as Leon and a grappler as incredible as Brady. Who do you got in this one, Luke?
I think you know, but I'm gonna side with Brady, not only because he's near where I live, but I think that we've seen how Leon does against, I mean, just looking at, like, yes, these are two of Bilal's victims that we're playing with. You know, you got Leon and Brady both losing to him. But I think that Brady's probably going to dominate, especially on the ground. It's not gonna be easy for Leon to win. I think that recently he's kind of proved that we don't know if he's as impressive as he once was. And maybe like sometimes, like I think he's kind of, the hype around him is a little bit exaggerated sometimes, just because of some of the highlights that he's accumulated. Or highlight. But yeah, that's what I think. But I
Look,
think it makes sense for the UFC to do this, especially if they're going to put JDM in the title shot, because of Shavkat being injured.
and look, I'm a huge fan of Brady. I think I've met Brady. He's a great guy. He reps Philly really hard, which I really appreciate. But unfortunately, I don't think he's going to win this fight. I think that Leon is too polished of a striker. I mean, think about, here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking about both their losses to Bilal Muhammad, because it's the same opponent, and Bilal was better when he fought Leon than when he fought Sean Brady, in my opinion. Bilal is probably a better grappler than Brady is. He's probably better on the ground. He's a lesser submission threat, but he's a better wrestling threat, right? He can't find the finish as well, but he can control you better, in my opinion.
I agree.
Right? Leon is a much better striker than Bilal. It's not even close. Not even close. And we saw in the striking exchanges that the unorthodoxness of Bilal was able to confuse Leon, but against the average UFC fighter, I would say Leon has the range, he has the technique, he's a better striker than Bilal.
Bilal struck him though.
But Bilal did outstrike him, but he didn't damage him at all. He only controlled him. What we saw when Brady fought Bilal is that Bilal damaged Brady. Bilal knocked Brady out. Standing TKO, I know. But still, rendered him unable to defend himself, hurt him many times. What I'm seeing through my analysis is that Leon's greatest weakness is the wrestling. However, he fought wrestlers as good as in Kamaru Usman, or better as in Bilal Muhammad. What we're seeing in Brady is a guy who's never fought a striker as good as Leon Edwards. We've never seen it. The best strikers he's fought have been Kelvin Gastelum, who's a good striker, sure, and Michael Chiesa, who's also fine. Gilbert Burns has lost his touch. I don't see him as a great striker at this point. I think that Leon is so many levels above the next best striker Sean has fought that he's gonna be overwhelmed. And he's still young and he's still got a bright future. He's world championship quality, and we know that. However, I do think that right now, I don't know that Sean Brady is ready for a fight against Leon Edwards. Now, we have 4 more fights to discuss today. I know it's so many fights. That's how we feel when we get this news broken to us by Dana White at 12 p.m. 12 a.m., honestly. Whenever he wants to. He gives us the news. Whatever. Main event. Because Jack Della Maddalena was pulled from UFC in London, he was given Bilal Muhammad, the champion, in Montreal in May at UFC 315. This is a very interesting matchup to me. I'm all over the place on this one. I won't give my pick until you give yours, Luke, because I'm going to play follow the leader probably. Who do you got in this one?
I mean, if it wasn't Shavkat, I think JDM deserves it, especially with his recent performances. I just think Bilal is he's too much. I think he's too much, and I feel like he gets better every single time he fights. He's one of these guys who evolves, and when he goes up against a striker, he outstrikes them. When he goes up against a grappler, he outgrapples them. He gets better every time I see him in every position of the sport. And I think that if there were a way for JDM to win, Bilal's just going to dominate him in that aspect, and he's going to adapt in the fight like we see him do when he fights. I don't think that JDM necessarily has the talent, the striking talent of Leon Edwards or the grappling talent of some of the people that Bilal's already beaten, such as Sean Brady. So it's just like I don't know. I know that it's probably going to be a close fight, but I just think that Bilal is going to get it done. I think that he could even like submit him or knock him out. It's by his choice.
I see. Like I wouldn't say all that, but what I will say is that I do think Bilal's going to get it done here. Jack Della Maddalena has crazy hand speed. He hits really hard. He can knock Bilal out. Bilal has always been chinny. However, Bilal is the closest fighting equivalent to a chameleon. Every time he fights you exactly to where your skills are the weakest, and he dominates you in that department. Like Sean Brady, knocked him out. Like Leon Edwards, wrestled him for 25 minutes. He is better than you wherever you go. That's the Bilal Muhammad experience. And that's what makes him so engaging as a student of mixed martial arts, as someone that observes it, and not exciting as a... However, what we're seeing with Jack Della Maddalena is a guy who's up the ranks and has seen adversity. He was losing to Gilbert Burns. He was losing to various opponents that he's fought. The only really great win he has is the Randy Brown win, in my opinion, which is, don't get me wrong, the best win on his career in terms of dominance plus talent. However, I tend to agree with you, Luke. I do think Bilal will get it done here. I think it's a close fight. I don't know if I'm as confident as you are, but I'm excited to see how it plays out. Now, our co-main event on UFC 315, Valentina Shevchenko is fighting Manon Fiorot. How about that pronunciation? At UFC 315 in Montreal. That's a great fight. Manon is undefeated in the UFC, coming off a great win over Erin Blanchfield. Shevchenko just won the title over Alexa Grasso, or defended her title against Alexa Grasso. This is a great fight. I mean, number 1 pound for pound woman versus the number 1 in the division. This is as good as it gets. What do you think, Luke?
Absolutely. I think you described it perfectly. I think that Ferrara hasn't fought since when we saw her in Atlantic City. So it's been a while, and she beat Blanchfield, so she's deserving. I don't see anything that's standing out to me as something that's necessarily, I mean, it's an exciting fight. But I don't have any problems with it. I think it's great matchmaking, but I think Shevchenko is just going to she's going to get it done. I think she's too overwhelming and there's too much of a skill difference here, in my opinion.
Look, here's the thing, and this is why I'm conflicted on this fight. I'm not going to give you a pick today. I need to think about this for another 2 months. However, Manon Fiorot fought Erin Blanchfield, who looked incredible, and has looked good since. She beat Rose Namajunas in a great fight. She looked absolutely incredible in the early stages of her UFC career, coming off of a huge win over Jessica Andrade. Made it look easy, made everybody look easy, and I was like, whoa, this girl is going to be a dominant champion for about a decade. Then she fought Manon Fiorot at home. Manon Fiorot made her look like she did not belong there. I mean, she really put BTA, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So, we're having a fighter that has showed levels above the rest of the division against a fighter who is levels above the division, if you know what I'm saying. And that there's Valentina Shevchenko, and then there's everybody else, and that's how it's always been. Except for when Alexa Grasso came up, and we'll talk about her in a second. But bar her and bar Nunes, nobody has been able to do to Shevchenko really anything competitive at all. Maybe Tyler Santos. That's about it. Tyler Santos isn't even in the UFC anymore. That's how long it's been. So what I'm saying is, this is a fight between 2 high-level technical mixed martial artists, 2 great strikers. Fiorot should have the home crowd advantage, being that it is in Montreal. This is going to be a really good fight. 2 more fights for UFC 315 we have coming up. First up is Alexa Grasso is fighting Natalia Silva in what I'm assuming is a title eliminator for the title fight that Shevchenko is fighting against Fiorot. Silva, of course, has been rising up the ranks at astronomical pace, whereas Grasso is a tried and true champion. We know how good she is. Who do you got in this one, Luke?
I mean, I'm gonna make up my pick on the fly here as I talk about the fight. I think it's gonna be very close. I think that, well, I know that Silva is riding a 12 fight win streak. And as she's as much as a prospect in that division, or not even prospect, but she's proven herself in that division to the biggest extent. And Grasso is maybe the number two, um, pound for pound, like best woman in that, or not pound for pound, but best woman in that division. So. I guess I'm gonna go with Grosso just because I'm more confident and I've seen more of her fights. But that's just purely a lack of education on Natalia Silva.
Look, I'm a big fan of Natalia Silva. I think she's a really really good prospect and becoming a good contender quickly. Grasso is obviously, we know what she is. We know how good she is. We don't know how good Natalia Silva is quite yet, and I'm excited to see that. However, my pick right now would be a Natalia Silva decision because I think Grasso is good enough in jiu-jitsu to hold her off there, but I think that Silva can control her and use her takedowns to set up big shots on the feet. One more fight at 315. This is the final fight we'll talk about today, which has been a really great episode. I've really enjoyed this episode.
Yeah, me too.
Good to be back.
Good to be back.
Ayman Zahabi, who is my pick for the best bantamweight outside of the UFC top 10, is squaring off against perhaps the greatest featherweight of all time, Jose Aldo. Now, for Aldo, I keep wondering when this will be his retirement fight because the UFC keeps making mistakes and squaring him up against great prospects instead of against fellow legends, which is what I would love to see. However, Aldo is given a really tough order after coming off a loss of Mario Bautista, and Zahabi continues to shock the world with more and more upsets. This is a hard fight to pick. I'm not going to pick it because I don't feel like it right now because this fight is too many variables. I mean, the striking of Aldo is so technical, so precise. Zahabi has so much power and it looks so good against really great guys. Do you have a pick here? Or are you just gonna get your popcorn ready?
Just gonna get my popcorn ready. I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of with you. I think you described it perfectly.
I mean, with that, we can end on a good note. We can end on an agreement. We're gonna hope to have the 313 episode out by Wednesday. We'll see if we can get it done by then. That is the goal. That is a very special episode because, oh my goodness, that card is so good.
It's just so special.
It's such a good card. We apologize for not making videos for the last couple weeks. However, what we will do is we're gonna try to up our schedule more in the next few weeks, as well as hope to work with some fighters, get them on the show, see what we can do there. However, with that in mind, we will see you next week, or see you in the next couple of days, because we're not going to wait 3 weeks again. We'll see you in the next couple of days. This has been No Casuals. I'm Aiden.
I'm Luke.
See you later.
Thanks for watching.